Do you make beats with samples? I know I do. I love making beats with samples. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be in the music business if it weren't for sample-based beats. My very first placement was with a sample-based beat, and I lost all of my publishing to a dead man. So here's how it works. You make a beat with a sample, right? You theoretically own 100% of that beat. The sound recording copyright, aka the master, and the underlying composition, aka the publishing. But then you sell it to a label for $4,000. And the label, in exchange for that $4,000, receives ownership of the sound recording copyright. I used the figure 4,000 because that's what I made off my first placement. I had a lawyer who really didn't care about me, and so that's why it was low. I probably could have gotten up to 10,000 for that. All right, so you sell it for 4,000. The label owns the master copyright, but you still retain 100% of your part of the underlying composition, which is normally 50% of the overall song, until the label clears the sample and the owner of that sample wants $10,000 just to clear the master recording and 100% of the producer's underlying composition equity. Then you own absolutely nothing. You own no part of the song. This is what happened to me. Now, I don't regret it. I would do it again every day of my life for the rest of my life if given the option. But I would be stupid not to at least try to make this experience and process a little less of a headache for myself. So put this into perspective. I made $4,000 off the beat advance, and they spent $10,000 to clear the sample. That means even before the album dropped, my royalty account was sitting at negative $14,000. Think about how much I have to make back just to get a royalty check. I don't just have to make back a straight $14,000 because I only get a fraction of the sales. And I don't even get mechanical royalties because that falls under the composition side, right? The underlying composition copyright, which I have 0% of because the sample owners took that from me. So yes, I still sample. If something's undeniable and I want to sample it, I'm going to sample it. But I've reduced how much I sample, and I'm going to present some alternatives. And I'm also not going to sit here and lie to you about the implications of using a sample. Now, don't shoot the messenger. I'm not here to tell you that the way sampling works in the present day music business is right. I don't think it is. I think a sample owner taking 100% of a producer's or an artist and producer's underlying composition rights is ridiculous. For example, the Sting versus Juice WRLD and Nick Mira situation, right?
Well, how did Juice WRLD take that when he found out the Sting was taking?
Juice don't care about money, man.
Really?
Juice don't care about that.
I think Sting took all of Nick Mira's share and then a bunch of Juice WRLD's share, which didn't sit right with me. In fact, I stopped listening to Sting after that situation. Also, around that time, I heard the backstory to Sting's song, Don't Stand So Close to Me, and I kind of felt like that guy was a little... what's the word?
You're a pretty prolific chatter there. Want to explain yourself?
I don't think artists like Sting are reasonable when it comes to sample clearance. They basically say, give me everything, and then they make millions. Again, I'm telling you how it is, not how it should be. Legally, that's their right. They hold all the leverage in a sample clearance negotiation. Because if they say no, at any point, that song gets shelved. But there's this whole myth about fair use. What is fair use? Fair use is a doctrine that is applied to legal cases to potentially prevent the unreasonable consequences of copyright law as we know it. It's not a law in and of itself. Why does it exist? Think of a school teacher making copies of a book, which is copyrighted material. They give those copies to their students. They're literally infringing on copyright. They're making copies of a text to which they don't own the rights. But because fair use allows for educational use of copyright materials, if that teacher ended up getting brought into court by the author or publisher of that book, they could defend themselves with the fair use doctrine. That makes sense, right? But a lot of people claim that sampling, making a sample-based beat, falls under fair use protection. I don't know why. A lot of producers justify that notion by saying, well, if you sample a really small piece, then it falls under fair use. Or if I flip the sample, it's transformative. Or if I make the beat sound funny, it's a it's a parody. I don't know. It's not a parody. It's not educational. How is flipping a sample into a dope ass beat a parody? Because it's funny how fire it sounds. How is it educational? Because these other producers are learning they can't fuck with me on the sample beats. It doesn't make sense. So it's not fair use. And people say, well, if you only sample a second of that material, you'll be covered under fair use. No. Kanye West was sued for less than a second worth of sampled material in the song Gold Digger. It was a vocal sample. They settled out of court. So he didn't win that case. Again, I'm just here to tell you how the law works so you can know more and know how to protect yourselves. And I tweeted about this. This is my first mistake. That's what everyone was saying. Why did I tweet about this? Everyone on Twitter's an asshole. I don't think everyone on Twitter is an asshole, but like a solid 86%, right? And of all the producer-related tweets I've ever shared, this one got me the most hate. And when I say hate, I mean hate. I'm not exaggerating. Why? I guess because people are stupid. All I said was sampling is not fair use. A lot of people with tiny brains thought that I was saying sampling is unfair. Why? Because they don't know about the music business, even though they're in the music business. This Instagram profile even used the headline as clickbait, knowing damn well a bunch of negative energy would be directed towards me if they simply lied about what my tweet said. Did they delete the post? Yes. Did they apologize or issue a statement explaining what fair use was so their followers weren't confused? No. Because why take accountability? Why educate your community? Why do any of that? Clicks. That's what matters in life. But even when some producers found out exactly what fair use was, they got even angrier because they realized not only were they wrong, but they were also ignorant. And then their blood pressure started looking like the meters on an unmixed beat without Fruity Limiter on the master bus. What an odd thing to get angry over. I even had to check in with people to make sure they were actually angry at me simply for sharing information. And yes, they were. So producers love to complain about how people gatekeep information. Industry producers don't want to share information. They don't want to help anybody. And then when someone shares information, they hate them. So enough about how optimistic I am about the collective intelligence of the producer community moving forward. Let me talk about sampling alternatives, things I'm doing now to avoid losing all my publishing to a deceased legendary artist estate. Firstly, making my own samples. And a lot of you have probably used samples that I've dropped because I've released a lot. I thank you for using them, the free versions or any of the premium packs that I've released. Seriously, thank you. I, like many other people who spent a lot of my production career sampling, kind of got an ear for sampling and decided to create music that I myself would like to sample, and then that became something that I released to the public. A lot of us are doing that. And once you start making your own samples, you meet other people who make their own samples. That's kind of how the Sample Lab was born. I don't own that site. That's Dream Life's site. But I met him before he started doing that, and when we slowly but surely started collaborating on creating samples together. And then we trade, among ourselves. So I've been using samples from Dream Life, Memory, Moonbird, Kavi, Dilly, Darrell Banks, Dirt Boy, Dope Boys. And that's what I meant. A lot of people thought it was hilarious that in my fair use tweet, I said existing songs. And people are like, how can a song not exist? People make samples that emulate the part of a song that a producer would want to sample. That composition isn't a song in and of itself, in the sense that it's not created as a song. It's not created to be consumed as a song, and it's not released and published on the platforms in the format that songs are published. And they're easy to clear. They should be easy to clear, right? Because the whole purpose of making sample packs is to give producers samples. So give them the experience of sampling minus all of the legal problems that come with sampling. However, I made a video about that because a lot of loop makers are messing things up and putting uncleared samples in their packs or requesting sample clearance if you use their little samples. But if I'm sampling people that I know personally, that's why I don't really mess with loops from people I don't know, though my inbox is full of them. I feel safer working with the people that I'm actually familiar with on a personal level. And there's also Splice. That's problematic though, right? It's problematic because of content ID systems. People abuse the content ID systems. The content ID systems are these billion-dollar identification systems that they're supposed to pay creators for others using their works. These systems allow anyone to claim ownership of anything, right? So people use a splice loop, run it through a content ID system. Anyone else using that splice loop gets flagged by this person who had nothing to do with creating the splice loop and does not actually own rights to that splice loop. They only have a royalty-free license. It becomes a problem. Now, Splice is addressing that. They're issuing licenses that you can download if you ever end up with a content ID dispute. The problem is certain platforms, not YouTube. YouTube gives you a chance to dispute, but Meta and TikTok will just cut your content down, delete it. They will not give you a chance to dispute it. But when it comes to getting a placement, Splice is perfect because content ID systems don't govern that. And you know, when a label drops something, you know damn well YouTube's not going to mess with Universal Music Group. There is a myth out there that labels and sync houses have banned beats with Splice samples. I've never personally experienced that myself. I've gotten placements with Splice samples. I've gotten placements in commercials with Splice samples, and I've heard tons of big commercials, big brands that incorporate Splice samples, ones that even I've used. And we should know about all the big artists that have hit songs with Splice samples. Everyone from Justin Bieber to Marshmello to Blast to the list. I'm trying to think I think Lil Baby has a lot of people. So what do we all do moving forward? I think really the only thing that we can do is continue to educate ourselves, protect ourselves by knowing more, knowing how to navigate these systems, knowing how to navigate the legal implications of whatever it is we're doing, whatever copyright landscapes we're existing within, expanding our knowledge, expanding our networks with trusted people, using the resources that are out there, certainly reading the end user license agreements of any sample pack that we use or any sample service such as Splice or Sounds or Looperman, whatever, so we're aware exactly of what's going on and what could happen if we decide to use these samples in different applications. Understand what your rights are. And then if somebody steps on those rights, assert them, know how to assert them, know how to file a DMCA claim, know how to file a dispute, get your resources ready, have a system in place for you personally so that if anything happens to you within the copyright landscape, you're at very least knowledgeable enough to defend yourself, and you're confident enough moving forward. I hate to see people in the producer community say, I'm never going to use samples, I'm never going to use Splice, I'm afraid of this, and that. Listen, man, I've been through pretty much every scenario that you could go through with samples. It's not that scary. Just use resources, pay attention, do your research. What you know about the music business is what puts you in the music business. If all you're doing is making music and not learning about the business, you're in music. You're not in the music business. And the good news is, honestly, it's not that hard. I think any other career field is harder and requires more learning and more experience than the music business. So much success to you on your sampling journey, or if you just decide that you don't want to sample and maybe you want to start making your own samples, much success to you in those endeavors. Appreciate you watching. Peace.